When it comes to car rentals, almost nobody ever talks about how does insurance actually work.
Shit. I told you guys Mercury was in retrograde. Look at this shit. It's all good though. We prevail regardless. Okay?
This is definitely the biggest hurdle for most people that I see, that I speak with, that I see online. There's a lot of online creators that talk about car rentals, and most of the questions in the comments seem to be, well, how does insurance actually work, especially when it comes to private rentals? And a lot of these creators and people, they just give very vague answers. That's not because it's some big secret. It's because it's uncomfortable to talk about, and it's really unique to every single situation based on your business.
Part of the game. Just gotta know how to navigate things.
In this video, I'm going to be breaking down how insurance actually works in the car rental game, what it means for you, how you can layer different protections, and how to think about insurance, because a lot of people think about insurance wrong. I've operated car rentals at scale, so I've done over $1 million per year. I've seen a lot of things go very right when it comes to how you handle insurance. I've seen a lot of things go very wrong, and I've been taught some very, very expensive lessons when it comes to car rentals.
They shot up my truck.
Hopefully I can give you the right guidance on how to think about insurance moving forward and how you can layer your protection. Now, before we get into this video, I do have to note that I am not a licensed insurance professional or broker. I'm also not a lawyer. Please make sure before you implement any of these ideas into your own business, consult a licensed insurance broker and a lawyer for your specific situation. The number one mistake that I see when people are trying to get into car rentals, or they're trying to pivot from Turo away into private rentals, is that they think that they can just buy some insurance policy. It's a one check box and they're good to go, and they never have to worry about anything but paying their policy premium. And that's just not the case. You have to think about insurance as risk management. And it's going to be different for every single operator in every single situation. Insurance is going to depend on how you operate your business, what your business structure is like, and how you manage your risk. When it comes to insurance, online advice can actually be very, very dangerous. A lot of people, they go on Facebook groups just like I am. They consume content around car rentals. Car rentals is literally my life, so that's all I consume. When I'm on social media, that's all I look at is car rentals. And a lot of people give really bad advice around insurance. What I see is that people kind of look for an answer, something that can kind of satisfy what they think is right, and then they go ahead and use that advice and apply it in their own business, and it most likely does not cover them well. And that's because they haven't talked to an insurance broker, they haven't talked to a lawyer about it, and they think that it's just the answer they're kind of looking for, and okay, that's good enough, I'm going to implement this, and this seems to work for someone else, so I'm going to go ahead and do it. This is very, very dangerous advice, and this can lose you a lot of money. You're going to hear a lot of people say, oh, don't worry about it, oh, just do this, just don't think about it. It's okay, it's worked for me. There is no universal insurance setup that works for everybody. Again, it's going to come down to your structure. It literally can come down to your city or state, because some insurance providers are just not going to work with you in a city or state. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit more in depth. It matters what kind of vehicles you're renting, how the vehicles are being used on rentals, who's driving the vehicle, how you're doing your customer screening. I've gone through insurance quotes where they're literally asking me, well, how do you screen your customers? How do you verify your customers? So it's all about risk assessment, who you're renting to, what kind of cars you're renting, what city or state you're in, what are the values of your vehicle? Are you renting a 10-passenger van, or are you renting a Lamborghini? That's going to be different. So whoever is going to insure you is going to be different. And then there's different layers of insurance within that. Our role as a business coach when it comes to car rentals is not to advise people exactly on how to do something. It's to give them enough information to make informed decisions that they can then talk to a licensed broker and professional to help them make their final decisions on how to best protect themselves and their business. Your risk tolerance is going to vary from operator to operator. And though you can do car rentals legally in many different forms, some might take a higher risk approach, and it really just depends. The most common insurance advice that I see is, especially for beginners, whether they're on Turo or they're pivoting into private rentals, just keep the car on your personal insurance. Don't tell your personal insurance. Just never actually use your personal insurance when it comes to an accident or a claim. This is bad advice because not telling your insurance certain information is technically classified as insurance fraud. In the past, I've seen people, in the space that end up getting into accidents, and then it reports to their personal insurance. Nothing bad, like super bad, has actually happened to these operators, but they'll get kicked off the policy. And then when they go to try to apply to a different policy, it's going to be noted, and it's going to be really, really hard to get themselves reinsured. And if they do get reinsured, then it could be very, very expensive. And this is just something you want to avoid for your personal life. You always want to have your business and your personal life separate. You do not want to commingle the two if possible. Obviously, when it comes to Turo, some people will have personal policies in the car, and I'm not sure why Turo doesn't address this issue. I'm not sure why they don't have a requirement of having your car on the platform commercially insured, but that's another topic. That's really none of my business. So the most common thing is people have their car personally insured, and then they run it on Turo. And like technically that's not okay. Yes, you are protected on trip and you'll never have to use your personal coverage as long as you are following Turo guidelines. And you also don't want to lie to your insurance when something does happen and claim it as a personal claim, because that can really get you in hot water. We're talking jails and fines. Even if you're using the Turo protection, first of all, if you don't have your processes down for Turo, it can become a big pain in the butt to try to get your claims covered. Let's say you have a renter and they're driving and they rear end somebody. Typically, the person that rear ends the person in front of them is at fault. So what's going to happen is, no matter that you're on a Turo trip, because your renter doesn't really know this, what's going to happen is they're going to take the license plate down, the phone number, the driver, and your insurance will get contacted. Some insurance companies, they don't care, even if it's on your personal policy, and they'll just brush it off. It's just not a risk you want to take, and it's really not how you want to operate your business. They'll just deny the claim, move forward, and you have to source your own protection, which in this case is Turo. And then the next thing is going to be the private rental operator portion of things, and this is where things get a little bit more risky, because people run the same business structure. They'll have it on their personal policy, and then when it's rented, they verify the renter's insurance. Someone's renting a vehicle from you, you can get their personal insurance, their personal auto policy. You would call them up or use a verification system. And typically, most major carriers, for the renter, the policy will transfer over to rental vehicles when they're under a rental agreement, and it is acted as their personal vehicle for the time being. There are some limitations to this. Essentially, you're relying on the renter's insurance, and you don't have a sound policy that if something does happen, that this policy is going to pay out. And some people get tempted, and I've heard of this happening, where they didn't do the insurance checks right, or they just assumed that the renter's policy would cover them during an accident. So when something does happen, they claim it on their personal insurance. And that's a really, really big no-no. That's the last thing you want to do. And you could be facing a lot of legal trouble if you do stuff like that. Taking that advice, I was even in a Facebook group today where someone was saying, oh, I do private rentals, but I just keep it on my personal policy. I just don't tell them. Something you definitely want to avoid. Now, there are different options. I'm not endorsed by any of these insurance companies. And again, I'm not an insurance agent, broker, or licensed professional. So please be sure to consult one. This is just what I know from what I've learned and from what I've used. If you're on Turo, it's actually pretty simple. You can use insurances like Tint AI. You can use insurances like Roamly, Adify. There are commercial off-trip policies that essentially they cover your vehicle when it's not on a trip, meaning when you're going to the car wash or when you're delivering it to a client or you're taking it on a maintenance run. These are all off-trip coverages, which are going to make sure that you meet your state insurance requirements to keep your vehicle registered, legal requirements to have insurance on your vehicle. Then when you're on trip on Turo, you're using Turo's coverage. So there's always coverage on the vehicle no matter what. Those are some options for Turo. And that, when it comes to Turo, it's pretty simple. A lot of people will just use their personal policy on their vehicle, and that's the only policy that they have, and then they rent it on Turo. And technically, that is not the correct thing to do in most situations. Again, some even major carriers do allow car sharing, but that is, is very rare that you find that, and it really just depends on the provider. And it's something that you can acquire with an insurance broker. Now we can talk about the elephant in the room, which is private rentals. So how do you handle insurance when it comes to private rentals? Well, there are different options. You can get a commercial coverage that gives you damage waivers, that covers the cars on trip, that gives you a CSL, which is a combined single limit, meaning no matter what happens, they will cover up to a certain amount. There are providers that offer things like this. These are just recommendations. Again, consult a professional, but there's a company called GMI. They will write you a CSL and they can provide on-trip coverage. I've also directly worked with Prime Insurance. So Prime Insurance is one to check out. There's companies like Adify. Adify has programs. It just depends on your state and city. Some may work and some not, and also depending on your situation. Then there's another method that you can use. When it comes to these policies that provide coverage on trip, the thing that you have to look out for, and this is where people get confused, that if they get one of these policies, they've struck gold and now they can just do private rentals and there's no care in the world because they have this coverage. That is far from the truth. These coverages are for extreme situations, and if you start making a bunch of claims under these policies, you're going to get kicked off of these policies, have what's called a loss run. A loss run is essentially an insurance profile for you that for your business shows how many losses you've taken over a period of time. If your loss run runs up quick, or you're making major claims all the time because you're not using the proper screening systems and verification systems and other coverages available to you to begin with, they will kick you off the policy, or they'll make your rate so high that you just can't afford to stay in business. Worse, they'll kick you off the policy, and then you have this loss run that other insurance providers are going to ask for, and you're going to be uninsurable. Then there goes that plan. What it really comes down to is your screening process, your verification process, your other insurance layers. If you have everything structured correctly, what you can do is you can take an off-trip coverage like Roamly, which allows private rentals. Another commercial insurance provider is Zurich. There's a bunch of these providers. You just have to reach out, and typically the best way to do it is with a broker, because sometimes getting the right people on the phone at those companies can be pretty hard. A very good broker can do this for you. When it comes to, let's say you don't have something like that to protect your business, what you can do is you can take an off-trip coverage like Roamly, which allows for private rentals, a thing like Addify, which maybe you're only buying the off-trip coverage, and then you have to worry about on-trip coverage as a separate issue. You can have criteria. If you're renting Lamborghinis, you can use the renter's personal insurance, and you call that personal insurance. You have certain limits that you look for, and then you ask the question of, well, is there any exclusions to this policy, and does this policy transfer to rental vehicles? If they don't qualify, they don't qualify. What that individual can do is they can then call their insurance back, see if they can make any changes to their policy that would take effect in time for them to rent this type of vehicle, or they can shop around for other policies that they can just purchase temporarily. There's also a thing called a non-owner's policy. If someone doesn't have a personal vehicle, or they don't have adequate coverage on their personal vehicle to rent your desired vehicle, they can reach out to providers like Bristol West or Progressive or Geico. And don't quote me on these because I'm not sure who's still doing these kinds of policies, but there are things called non-owners policies. They have to make sure that the coverage is proper for what they're looking to rent and for their specific situation, but they can try to seek a non-owners policy, which will cover them for any vehicle that they're driving essentially under that non-owners policy. Another thing to do is you can get over-the-counter third-party insurance. So you have your off-trip insurance, which is going to cover you in the event of anything happening off-trip, and it's going to keep the vehicle legally registered. Next thing you can do is on-rental coverage from a third party, and that's going to be things like rentalcover.com. There are also other websites like Bonza. You just have to make sure that you're reading their criteria, because some of them exclude certain vehicles or certain activities. Whatever vehicle you're renting fits the purpose for this on-trip coverage. Typically, they have lower limits, and then there's other over-the-counter products that you can purchase from other providers. This is something that I guide my students to. It's not a public thing, but I do have access to over-the-counter insurance that can be purchased for vehicles with higher limits and of other makes and models. This is not something that I'm going to provide to you on video. This is something that students get that work with me one-on-one. So on that topic, getting into private rentals is something you've been wanting to get into, or pivoting out of Turo, there is a link in the description below. You can apply to work with me one-on-one, and I can help you side by side pivot into private rentals successfully. As I've touched on, there's other over-the-counter methods. And then even some commercial providers like GMI, and I'm not quoting GMI, I'm just using them as an example. I don't know if they offer this still. You can sell forward damage waivers. And then there's also another option, which this one requires a little bit more capital, but you can be self-insured. In some states, there's different requirements, but if you have a certain amount of capital in the business, you can become licensed and bonded by the state to sell damage waivers and be a self-insured business. This is essentially what Turo does. Turo is a self-insured business. So when there's any damage to your vehicle on a rental, Turo is paying that out of pocket, whether you knew that or not. They do have a third-party liability coverage by Travelers Insurance that is for bigger claims or for other vehicles that are involved in accidents. Those are all options you can explore. Essentially what Turo is doing, they're using the model of, well, they have a third-party liability, but they don't have on-trip coverage. And that's why they have a protection plan. That's why they collect a percentage of your fees on every rental. That is why they have deductibles for you and the guest. If your deductible is $2,750 and the guest deductible is $3,000, the guest paid for the protection plan upfront. They took a cut from your earnings. Now let's say your car gets in an accident and the damage is only $5,000. What's going to happen is they're going to take your $2,750. They're going to take the client's $3,000. So that's already over $5,000 they've collected. So they actually make money on this claim. And so that's part of their earnings, is that they can collect all these fees. And then sometimes when they pay out on accidents, they actually make money on it. And over time, obviously, they're collecting all these fees, hoping to lower their risk, to rent to less risky renters. As they give the car to less risky renters, they're collecting on your percentage. Maybe you're on a 70-30 plan and they're taking 30% of every single rental. They're charging the client on every single rental. What goes into their math is how much are they collecting for their damage waivers, which is they just quote as a protection plan, and how does that factor into how much they're actually paying out in claims. This is a strategy that you can essentially take on if that's something you wanted to do. Again, you got to consult someone that is licensed in the field, but you can become self-insured and you can run something like that where you're selling damage waivers and protection plans and making sure that you assess your risk over time to see if you're collecting more in damage waivers than you're paying out to fix your vehicles. Because the last thing you want to do is use your commercial insurance and then get kicked off of your policy because you're doing too many claims on there. The topic is a lot more complicated than this. This is just a simple summary to really ease some fears and some misconceptions behind insurance. There's also a thing called the Graves Amendment. I encourage you to look it up. Graves Amendment essentially means that when a renter is renting a vehicle and they get into an accident and something happens, that you as a rental car company can only be held up liable to a certain dollar amount, and it's a pretty low threshold, and it really, the responsibility is on the renter. What it comes down to is people are very afraid of insurance. In my experience, in my business, insurance is not what's been the problem. It's been the screening process of who I let rent the vehicles. You're going to have higher risk renter profiles who are more likely to cause accidents or get you in sticky situations. You're going to have unqualified customers if you're not doing your insurance verification correctly. When they do get into an accident, they don't have the proper coverage to get covered because maybe they handed you a insurance card that, just their liability insurance card, and you just assumed everything was good. You took that, and that's the only sort of verification that you did. There's also other things like screening for identity theft or other things that would disqualify them from renting a car, such as a suspended license. And it's really about getting to know your customer. And that is the biggest downfall that I see. It's not that, well, I didn't have commercial coverage on this vehicle. It's that you didn't do the proper screening. You didn't do the proper risk assessment of who you're renting to. And that's what it's going to come down to. You want to avoid accidents happening in the first place. When accidents do happen, you want to make sure that the client is actually responsive, has the proper coverage, and that you're not guessing on what to do next and maybe paying for something out of pocket because you were negligent on your risk assessment of the renter. There's a lot of different processes involved in this, and there's a lot of methods of insurance verification. It is a very, very complicated topic. It can be done correctly, and I've been very, very profitable when it comes to private rentals. I've been doing this for years. I've done thousands and thousands of trips, mostly exotic, high-end luxury vehicles. So I do know what I'm talking about. But again, just make sure that you consult an insurance professional and a lawyer for your particular situation always, and do not take online advice from some guy who's been renting cars for a year, has it on his personal policy, uses renter's insurance and things like that, because there's a lot of guys out there that are giving bad information, and that's going to get you in legal trouble down the road. Also, when it comes to protecting yourself and your business, it really matters how your business is structured, because you can be as simple as running your cars under your personal name, even if you have a commercial coverage. Some commercial providers are not going to allow that. Hypothetically speaking, you can run it that way, which is super high risk. You're personally liable if you get sued or anything like that. And then you can have an LLC, which, if you keep your personal and your LLC business separate, then your LLC is liable. You can have a structure where a trust owns an LLC, and this is getting into more complicated business structure. But there are all types of layers of protection on top of insurance that you want to explore, so that you can sleep at night and so that you can make sure that your vehicles are covered for your business. Again, this is a super complicated topic. This topic can be navigated, and you can still have a lot of success in this business. Turo is something you're looking to pivot out of, or you're looking to start your own car rental company and you want to do private rentals. Apply the mentorship below. I am only taking a limited number of people because I do mentor everyone one-on-one to their particular situation. Thank you for watching this video. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment, and we'll see you in the next one.